Emma Carter darted through the bustling downtown cafe, weaving past baristas calling out orders and students hunched over laptops. Her arms were full of neatly bound legal briefs, pages threatening to spill with every hurried step. The weight of her career and her dreams pressed against her chest, but beneath the chaos of her morning, her heart fluttered with a very different anticipation. She was late, but Jason Hale would understand. He always admired her dedication. To Emma, Jason wasn't just a boyfriend, he was her future, her safe harbor after years of scraping her way through law school and the grueling first years at her firm. Today felt different, charged with the kind of nervous energy that whispered of new beginnings. As she spotted him at their corner table, his tailored suit catching the soft glow of the cafe's hanging lights, her lips curved into a hopeful smile. This was the man she imagined standing at the end of an aisle, waiting for her. She envisioned the velvet box he might carry, the one that would promise stability, commitment, and the life she thought they were building together. Every hurried step toward Jason was a step toward that dream, and Emma believed, with absolute certainty, that today would mark the start of forever. Jason rose smoothly from his chair, his movements rehearsed, polished, like every courtroom performance he delivered with devastating precision. His embrace was warm, but fleeting, and before Emma could settle into the comfort of it, he was already reaching into his briefcase. A flash of velvet confirmed her suspicions, her breath caught, her pulse spiked, her heart lifted. But then, with an almost surgical detachment, Jason slid the small box across the table, not opening it, not even looking at her reaction. Emma's trembling fingers hovered, waiting, praying for the words she had longed to hear. Instead, his voice cut sharp, businesslike. "Let's make this official, not about love, about strategy." The room seemed to still around her, the laughter of strangers muffled, the clinking of coffee cups drowned out by the pounding in her ears. Confusion flickered across her face as she opened the box, expecting a diamond, only to find a neatly folded contract inside. Jason's gaze was steady, his tone unyielding as he explained, "Love is fleeting, Emma. But power lasts." Each word sliced through the fragile veil of her dreams, unraveling the fantasy she had built of him as her forever. In that instant, the man she thought she knew, the man she believed loved her, transformed into a stranger across the table, calculating and cold. Emma's throat tightened, her breath hitching as though the air itself had turned against her. She stared at Jason, desperately searching his face for a flicker of warmth, of vulnerability, of anything that resembled love. But there was nothing, only ambition, only control. The cafe's golden lights blurred as tears welled in her eyes, her carefully constructed world beginning to crack apart in real time. She wanted to scream, to demand why, to tell him that love wasn't meant to be reduced to a line item in a contract. But the words never left her lips. Instead, silence became her shield, heavy and suffocating, as she pushed back her chair. The sound of it scraping against the wooden floor was louder than the shattering of her heart. Jason didn't stop her. He didn't reach for her hand, didn't call her name. He only adjusted his cufflinks, as if the loss of her love was nothing compared to the gain of his strategy. Emma walked out into the night, her steps unsteady, her chest burning. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as her first tear slipped free, sliding down her cheek, marking the moment she realized that the man she thought would be her forever had only ever seen her as a piece in his game. Her heart pounded against her ribs, raw and unprotected, as the city swallowed her whole. Emma Carter's childhood was shaped by quiet sacrifice and the kind of resilience that grows only in the shadow of loss. At 15, her world fractured when her father died suddenly, leaving her mother to shoulder the crushing responsibility of raising 2 children. Emma, though still a child herself, stepped into the role of protector. She became the steady hand for her younger brother, Daniel, encouraging him through his studies, while also helping her mother juggle bills and household duties. College became less about chasing passion and more about survival, a path toward stability, not self-expression. Art had once filled her world, sketchbooks stacked by her bed, afternoons spent painting in sunlit corners, dreams of galleries and non-profit work that would give meaning to her talent. But those dreams were folded away like paper cranes left unfinished. Emma told herself she could return to them later, once the storm of responsibility had passed. Law school was a practical choice, a shield against the uncertainty that had haunted her family after her father's death. Even as she excelled, though, Part of her longed for the freedom of the girl who once believed life could be about beauty rather than survival. That longing never left her, it lived quietly, tucked behind the professional facade she wore every day. Jason Hale, by contrast, grew up in a world where wealth insulated him from the struggles Emma knew too well. He was raised in sprawling estates, taught early that success wasn't about passion but domination. His father, a ruthless corporate mogul, instilled in him the belief that people were pieces on a chessboard, to be maneuvered, sacrificed, or controlled as necessary. Jason inherited not only his father's sharp intellect but also his cold worldview that love, loyalty, and morality were fleeting, unreliable commodities. To Jason, only power endured, and everything else was a distraction. While Emma was fighting to hold her family together, Jason was being groomed to expand his empire, handed opportunities she could only dream of. Yet he was not without ambition of his own. He wanted to step out from his father's shadow and prove himself, not as the heir to wealth, but as a force capable of surpassing the empire he'd been born into. His charm was part of his arsenal, the polished smile, the confident voice, the way he could make people feel chosen, valued until they weren't. Emma, with her steady devotion and unyielding loyalty, was exactly the kind of asset Jason admired. She grounded him, provided an image of warmth and humanity that he could wield when convenient. But beneath his admiration was calculation, and beneath his affection was strategy. In Emma's present, the cracks in her world are beginning to show. She has built a life around Jason, convincing herself that his ambition was the stability she longed for, even as it slowly eroded her own sense of self. Her best friend, Maya Lopez, a fiercely loyal journalist with a sharp instinct for truth, has never trusted Jason's charm. Maya warns Emma that the man she's tethered her life to cares more about optics than love. At the same time, Daniel, Emma's younger brother, is drowning in student loans, leaning on her for support. Emma shoulders his burden without complaint, but each added responsibility pushes her further from her forgotten passions. Jason's mother, Margaret Hale, looms like a shadow, cold, calculating, and approving of Jason's ruthless climb. She sees Emma not as a partner but as an accessory, someone useful for Jason's image, but never truly equal. Emma feels these truths pressing in on her, though she resists acknowledging them. Late at night, when silence replaces Jason's clipped conversations, Emma's thoughts wander back to her old sketchbooks, her longing for purpose beyond contracts and courtroom battles. The tension builds quietly, like an approaching storm. Emma, loyal and hopeful, clinging to the belief that love exists beneath Jason's ambition, while every action, every word, proves she has always been a piece in his game. The woman who once dreamed of art and light now stands at a precipice, blindfolded by love but edging closer to the fall. Emma Carter had spent her entire adult life walking the tightrope between responsibility and ambition, but nothing prepared her for the betrayal she uncovered that evening. A call from her bank had sent her heart racing, confusion curdling into dread. Sitting at her kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills and her brother Daniel's student loan statements, she scrolled through the emailed documents that bore her name. It was all there, her signature replicated with unsettling precision, attached to a real estate deal worth more than she could ever dream of affording. The implications hit her like a blow. Her credit, her future, her stability were all tied up in something she hadn't agreed to, something Jason had orchestrated without her knowledge. For years, she had convinced herself his ambition was theirs, that she was part of the foundation he was building. But staring at the digital ink of her stolen consent, Emma realized with cold clarity that Jason had not only underestimated her trust, he had exploited it. Every sacrifice she had made, every piece of herself she had given up to support him, was reduced to a tool for his gain. Her heart pounded as she printed the documents, each page a weapon of betrayal. She thought love had broken her once, but this was different. This was her very life, her security, her name hijacked in the pursuit of Jason's empire. And Emma knew she couldn't remain silent anymore. That night, Emma stood in the pristine foyer of Jason's luxury apartment, the place she had once imagined would become their shared home. The city skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, a view meant to impress, but all Emma saw was emptiness. The printed documents trembled in her hands as Jason strolled in, loosening his tie with the casual confidence of a man who believed he controlled every room he entered. "Jason," she began, her voice raw, the papers shaking between them like a verdict. "What is this?" His eyes flicked to the evidence and back to her face, unbothered, almost bored. "It's just business, Emma. Don't take it personally." The dismissal was a knife twisted in an already open wound. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He didn't even bother to pretend remorse. Emma's chest ached as his words echoed in the sterile air of the apartment. This was the man she had believed in, sacrificed for, dreamed of marrying, and now he stood before her, confirming what Maya had warned all along. To him, she wasn't a partner, she was leverage. Emma's voice cracked as she tried to protest, to remind him of trust, of love, of partnership. But Jason had already turned away, pouring himself a drink at the bar, as if the matter were as insignificant as spilled ink. In that moment, Emma understood Jason hadn't just broken her heart, he had gambled with her future as if it belonged to him. Emma left Jason's apartment in silence, the weight of betrayal pressing so heavily on her chest she could hardly breathe. The documents clutched in her bag felt like chains, binding her to a man who no longer resembled the partner she thought she loved. That night, she sat across from Maya Lopez in a dimly lit diner, her best friend's sharp eyes scanning every page. "He forged your name, Emma. This isn't just betrayal, it's criminal." Maya's voice trembled with anger, but her loyalty never wavered. "You can fight back. You have to. Expose him. Don't let him destroy you." Emma wanted to nod, to seize the fire in Maya's words, but her heart remained torn. Despite everything, despite the coldness in Jason's voice and the ruthless calculation in his actions, a part of her still loved him. That love was a chain heavier than any forged signature, binding her to the ghost of the man she thought he was. Tears blurred the ink on the pages as she whispered, "I don't know if I can." Maya leaned across the booth, her tone fierce, almost pleading. "Then he wins, Emma. He wins, and you lose everything." Emma's silence was her only reply, but deep within her, something shifted, a fracture widening into resolve. For the first time, she began to see Jason not as her future, but as the enemy standing in the way of her survival. Jason didn't just betray Emma on paper, he invaded her mind, twisting her reality with words sharpened to cut deeper than any legal maneuver. When she confronted him again, desperate for answers, he leaned back in his leather chair with that same smug detachment that had once seemed like confidence. "No one will believe you, Emma," he murmured, his tone almost pitying. "You've built your career because of me. You live in my world, under my name. Without me, you're nothing but another lawyer struggling to pay rent." His words weren't shouted, they didn't need to be. Jason knew how to wield silence, how to lace truth with poison until Emma questioned herself. He reminded her of the dinners he paid for, the doors he had opened, the stability she claimed to crave. And Emma, already fragile, already doubting, felt the edges of his accusations claw at her chest. Was she dependent? Had she sacrificed her own path for him so completely that her life was now tied to his lies? Each time she tried to argue, Jason shifted the conversation, turning her outrage into overreaction, her fear into drama. It was psychological warfare, a gaslighting so subtle yet brutal that Emma left their encounters doubting not only her case against him, but her own worth. Reality crashed down with the harsh ring of debt collectors, their voices clipped and merciless as they demanded payments Emma never agreed to. Each call was another reminder of the fraudulent deal Jason had chained to her name, her credit unraveling before her eyes. Bills piled on her desk like enemies multiplying overnight. She tried to hide it, to carry the weight quietly as she had since her father's death, but Daniel saw through her mask. Her younger brother's eyes burned with betrayal when he snapped, "You trusted him, Emma. You let him do this to us." The words struck harder than Jason's gaslighting, because they came from love wounded into anger. Daniel, drowning in his own debt, needed her more than ever, yet now he saw her as complicit in their downfall. Emma's attempts to explain, to plead that she had been manipulated, only widened the chasm between them. She had been the responsible one all her life, the one who kept the family steady when everything else fell apart. Now, in Daniel's eyes, she was the one who had failed them both. The guilt was suffocating, a heavy cloak she couldn't shrug off. For the first time, Emma felt truly alone, caught between Jason's lies, her brother's resentment, and the crumbling foundation of the life she had worked so hard to build. When the walls closed in, Emma turned to the one person who had never abandoned her, Maya Lopez. Fierce and relentless, Maya refused to let Jason's intimidation define the ending. "He's not untouchable," she said late one night as Emma curled up on Maya's worn sofa, too afraid to return to her own apartment. "I've started digging into his company. There's a trail, Emma, shady deals, shell accounts, things that don't add up." For the first time, Emma felt a flicker of hope, though it was buried under layers of fear. Jason had already cornered her, sending threats masked as legal notices, warning of lawsuits that would financially destroy her if she dared to speak out. The intimidation was enough to keep Emma awake at night, listening for footsteps in the hallway outside, her heart racing at every shadow. Maya's tiny apartment became a refuge, but also a reminder of how far Emma had fallen from the glittering promise of Jason's penthouse to borrowed blankets and restless nights on a couch. Yet in that cramped space, surrounded by Maya's unshakable loyalty, Emma began to feel something stirring inside her. Not rage, not even defiance, but survival. Jason had taken her love, her financial stability, her family's trust. She couldn't let him take her future. The battle lines were forming, though Emma wasn't sure yet if she had the strength to cross them. Emma knew confronting Jason directly would never be enough. He thrived in private battles, twisting her words, manipulating her reality, always staying one step ahead. So, for the first time, she played his game and turned the rules against him. Hidden behind a glass wall at his investors' dinner, she pressed record on her phone, her pulse thundering as Jason spoke with unchecked arrogance. His voice carried with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "People are pawns. Even Emma, she thought we had a future. But she was just leverage." The words stung like fresh wounds, but Emma held steady, knowing this was the proof she needed. Hours later, Maya sat with her in the cramped newsroom of her paper, headphones on, jaw tightening as the confession replayed. "This is it," Maya whispered, her journalist instincts blazing. Together, they pushed the recording out to every contact, every outlet. By dawn, Jason's name dominated headlines, corporate golden boy exposed in fraud scandal. The man who once controlled the narrative now watched it crumble in real time. Emma scrolled through the articles, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the shock of finally having power on her side. For the first time in months, she wasn't the one drowning, Jason was. But Jason Hale was not a man who surrendered quietly. That evening, Emma's apartment door shook under the force of his pounding fists before he stormed inside, his polished veneer stripped away by fury. His eyes blazed, his composure shattered. "You did this," he spat, his voice low and venomous. "You ruined me. After everything I gave you, this is how you repay me." Emma's heart pounded, but she didn't shrink back. She stood her ground in the center of her modest living room, her spine straighter than it had been in months. "You betrayed me long before I betrayed you," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Jason froze, her words slicing through the storm. For a flicker of a moment, his mask slipped, the rage gave way to something raw, something almost human. Regret flashed in his eyes, brief and fleeting, before it hardened back into the cold steel of ambition. "Love doesn't matter," he growled, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "Winning does." Emma's breath caught, but she refused to look away. The man before her was no longer the partner she had once loved. He was the enemy, and this was the battlefield where she finally chose herself. Before Jason could hurl another word, red and blue lights flooded through the blinds. Maya had tipped off the police, and the timing was perfect. A thunder of boots climbed the stairs, and within seconds, the door burst open behind Jason. Officers surged in, commanding him to step away. His fury twisted into disbelief, then desperation, as cold steel clicked around his wrists. "This isn't over, Emma," he shouted, struggling as they dragged him toward the hall. For the first time, his voice trembled not from power, but from fear. Emma stood frozen, her chest heaving, watching the man who had once promised her forever hauled away in handcuffs for fraud, his empire collapsing brick by brick. Silence settled after the commotion, broken only by Maya's steady voice behind her. "You did it." Emma turned slowly, tears stinging her eyes, not of weakness but of release. She wasn't free yet, the debts, the damage, the scars remained, but the shadow of Jason Hale no longer loomed over her. She had faced him, exposed him, and survived. And in that quiet moment, Emma realized the truth Jason could never understand. Love, trust, even vulnerability, those were not weaknesses. They were the strength that had carried her through, the strength he had underestimated until it destroyed him. The courtroom was colder than Emma expected, its polished wood and high ceilings intimidating in their grandeur. Yet when she stepped forward to testify, her voice carried not just her words, but the weight of every moment Jason had tried to silence her. She spoke of love turned to manipulation, of the careful gaslighting that left her questioning her own sanity, of the betrayal that endangered not only her heart but her future. Each word trembled with emotion, but not weakness. This was her truth, stripped bare for all to see. Jason sat across the room, his once flawless suit now wrinkled, his eyes filled with the quiet fury of a man watching his empire collapse. 4 years, he had dictated the narrative, but here, in this room, Emma reclaimed it. The jury listened, rapt, as she explained how ambition had been weaponized against her trust. When the verdict came, guilty of fraud, embezzlement, and forgery, Emma closed her eyes, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for years. Jason Hale, the man who had once promised her forever, was sentenced not to a future of power, but to a prison cell. Justice, though imperfect, had been served, and Emma walked out of that courtroom not as Jason's victim, but as her own advocate. The weeks that followed were not without hardship. Debt collectors still called, and the damage Jason had left behind couldn't be erased overnight. But Emma faced it differently now, with resilience instead of fear. She took a position at a local art nonprofit, a place she had once only dreamed of working. Surrounded by canvases, paint, and children eager to create, she felt a piece of herself return, the part she had buried under Jason's shadow. The work wasn't glamorous, nor was it lucrative, but it filled her days with meaning instead of manipulation. Her relationship with Daniel began to heal as well. Over late-night coffees and quiet apologies, they slowly rebuilt the bond fractured by betrayal. He admitted his anger had come from fear of losing the sister who had always been his anchor. Together, they began making plans for a future that wasn't defined by debt or Jason's schemes, but by the small victories they could build on their own. Each payment Emma made toward her loans, each project she completed at the nonprofit, was a step away from the wreckage of her past and toward the life she was choosing for herself. Perhaps the most profound shift came one quiet evening, when Emma set up a canvas in her living room and dipped her brush into paint for the first time in years. At first, her hand hesitated, unsure, as if Jason's voice still lingered, whispering that art was frivolous, that ambition mattered more. But then, with a slow stroke, the colors came alive, spilling across the canvas with the raw honesty of someone rediscovering herself. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, a symbol of the freedom she had fought for. When Maya published her feature in the paper, the headline read, "A woman who turned heartbreak into justice." The story was shared across the city, and for once, Emma wasn't in the shadows of Jason's reputation. She was known for her courage, her resilience, her truth. Standing in her apartment, paint-stained hands resting at her sides, Emma felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. She had been broken, betrayed, stripped of almost everything, but she had also survived. More than that, she had reclaimed the parts of herself Jason had tried to erase. And as she added the final brushstroke to her painting, she whispered to herself, not as a promise to anyone else, but as a vow to her own heart, "I am whole again." Emma's new apartment was nothing like Jason's towering penthouse, and that was exactly why she loved it. The walls were warm with sunlight during the day, and at night, the city lights outside her window glittered like scattered stars. It was small, cozy, imperfect, but it was hers. No contracts signed in her name without consent, no shadows of someone else's ambition. Tonight, she sat cross-legged by the window, sketchbook balanced on her knees, a pencil moving softly across the page. Her lines were tentative at first, but soon they curved with quiet confidence, forming shapes that carried both memory and hope. The city hummed below, alive and unbothered, as Emma finally allowed herself to breathe in peace. She thought of the courtroom, the chaos, the heartbreak, and how close she had come to losing herself completely. Now, in this quiet space, she realized that survival wasn't just about walking away, it was about choosing to rebuild. She picked up her journal, its pages heavy with the weight of her journey, and began to write. He said it was just business. But I know now, love, trust, and freedom are not transactions. They are choices. And I finally chose me. As if on cue, her phone buzzed against the window ledge. Emma picked it up, her lips curving into a tender smile as she opened the message from Daniel. It was a picture of their mother, older now, weary but radiant, her smile glowing with pride. "She's so proud of you," the caption read. Emma's eyes stung with tears, but this time they weren't from pain or regret. They were the release of years of burden, of trying to carry the world for her family, of believing she had failed them. For the first time, she felt like she had given something back, not through sacrifice, but through strength. Another buzz followed, a message from Maya, to new beginnings. Emma laughed softly, wiping her cheek with the back of her hand. Maya had been her anchor, her mirror, her reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was always light. Between Daniel's loyalty and Maya's unshakable friendship, Emma realized she had never truly been alone, even when Jason had tried to convince her otherwise. These connections, built on love and trust, were worth more than any empire Jason had tried to build. Emma set her phone down, closing her eyes as a quiet sense of peace washed over her. She wasn't the same woman who had once walked into a cafe, dreaming of a proposal that would define her future. She wasn't the same woman who had been gaslit, betrayed, and nearly destroyed by someone she thought she loved. She was more than all of that. She was the girl who once dreamed of art, the woman who stood in court and told her truth, the sister and friend who had learned that resilience doesn't mean bearing everything alone. Opening her eyes, she gazed at the skyline, its glow reflecting in her window. The city that had once felt overwhelming and indifferent now felt like possibility itself. Emma smiled, softly but surely, a smile born not of illusion but of peace. Tears traced her cheeks, but they weren't the bitter kind, they were the gentle release of someone who had found herself again. She turned back to her sketch, her pencil gliding over the page with steady grace, each line a quiet declaration. She was not broken. She was whole. And as the night deepened, Emma chose not to close the curtain, but to leave the window open, letting the city's lights shine in like a promise of everything still to come.